all the sessions finished? Or? Of course, you cannot know because if you are here and...
I came from session 2. And it is just finished.
Okay, so now we can start.
But Pietro's not here.
We can start with this closing session of the CONCORDi 2019 conference. It's, of course, a pleasure to be here on stage to say a few words before going into the real stuff that will be discussed in this session. This closing session is meant to try to summarize, to give you the main feelings that we share about the discussions that have taken place here in this couple of days, and generate therefore food for further thoughts and action that each of us will take home. Before getting into the real business, I would ask you to allow me for a couple of minutes for some housekeeping duties. And I would like just to inform you that this conference was attended by around 300 participants, and with average kind of almost 200 per day, coming from 44 countries. I will not list them all, but certainly some from Spain. We discussed, you presented and we all discussed 66 papers that passed quite a tough selection. Actually, we got more than 150 proposed submissions, so congratulations. And we had 20 parallel sessions, 5 keynote speakers, and kind of slightly more than 100 people having an active role in the conference. We had also a cocktail dinner party last night, and I see that many of you have survived it. That's a good indicator for next time. I would like just to mention that the Best Paper Award of CONCORDi 2019 was granted to Maarten de Ridder from Cambridge University for the paper which is titled Market Power and Innovation in the Intangible Economy. And also, yesterday night, we have granted a special award to Professor Bronwyn Hall for her outstanding scientific merits and for being a close friend and contributor to the CONCORDi conferences, to the CONCORDi, I would say, series of conferences. So congratulations to both of them. Now, that's the Herculean task that these 3 ladies will have to deliver right now. And I'm very pleased and honored to host them on stage. I mean, they don't need any introduction. You all know them, and I probably would be really a bad amphitryon if I introduced them, because I would miss probably some important thing about each one of them. So, without further ado, I think that this is the right moment where we can listen to considerations that Maria Grazia, Chiara and Reinilde, as members of the scientific committee of the CONCORDi conference, will give to you in these final moments. So, Maria Grazia, maybe you will be the first one to take the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much to everybody for this brilliant conference. Yet another time, another fantastic CONCORDi conference. I don't know if you hear me.
No.
So, I was asked to try and tease out a bit what are the key policy implications of 6. Hello? I have 2, huh? Not 1. Non-working. I have it. We? Yes, now yes. Okay. So again, I was saying thanks a lot to everybody. Thanks a lot again for another fantastic CONCORDi conference. What my task is supposed to be today is to try and bring together some of the key policy implications of 6 sessions that were discussed along these 2 full days of the conference. Now, it was not only my task, but Renilde, Chiara, and myself were asked to summarize in less than 30 minutes the discussion had in 20 sessions. And when we asked, we were asked, we said, yes, Pietro, we can accomplish this mission impossible. So here we are. Now, the kind of issue I'm going to try and synthesize the discussion of is about R&D gaps and dynamics, and now this link actually to the digital transformation, the way in which global and local innovation and industry 4.0 relate to each other, and then the questions that arise by the time we look into advanced manufacturing, what are the global and the local aspects. And last but not least is about, at the end of the day, the underpinning dynamics of all these phenomena. It is firms, how they behave, what they do, and what are the barriers to their behaviors. Now, Carolina Castaldi was chairing this session on R&D gaps and dynamics. Now, I already apologize because surely, as we go on, I will mispronounce the surname of some of the chairs, so already I apologize. So Pietro and colleagues investigated the relative weight of structural and intrinsic, that is, one is the sectoral composition, the other one is driven by firm-level differences that contribute to explain R&D intensity gaps, and the comparison was between Europe and US. And what they find is actually very interesting, that is like the US have more R&D intensive firms in high-tech sectors, whereas what happens in Europe seemingly is that R&D happens more often in low, medium tech sectors. So the question becomes why, and what is that policy can learn from that? Zykowski, instead, proposes us a different picture, this time a country-specific picture, that is about the ability of sectors to come up with process and product innovation. So, okay, this is the gap that seems to exist. Now, let's focus on a country. Let's try to understand what happens. And what he finds is that high-tech sectors appear to have these higher process and product innovation levels, but it is not really clear what is that drives this and what are the conditions that apply. So he calls for further research once we have evidence that there are these disparities. Finally, in this session, Gisele Basso and Porto looked at the output that comes out in terms of patents from R&D, and they managed to reconstruct the technological trajectories that occur in pharmaceutical industries in order, and then use information on firms and collaborations, because, for instance, one thing that policy hasn't fully understood yet is what drives the invention and innovation processes, and what are the key components. Again, a very important information that policymakers need. Then, Katarzyna Śledierska, sorry Katarzyna, where are you? Was chairing the digital transformation. As I said, the first one was easy. I'm Italian, now we get into the troubles. And what we learned from there, actually I love this paper by Jacopo Staccioli and colleagues, that apply advanced machine learning in order to provide evidence about and the extent to which technologies might be replacing human workers, and especially they focus on robots. Now, at the OECD, we did try to start an investigation to identify and typify robot-related innovation, and that's not trivial, so really congratulations. They have to use USPTO data because at the end of the day, they are the only ones where, for the moment, there is full text easily available. And they do understand a couple of very interesting things. The first one is that many of the robot-related developments seem to belong to firms that want to apply them. So it's an internal development for their own usage. The other one is that they are able to identify areas where labor is likely to get soon, at least partially displaced. And this is not so obvious because it is about logistics, which we would expect, but healthcare is an area where a lot has been discussed, but it seems it's really coming. Duck's paper instead was about another aspect of the digital transformation, that is the servicization of manufacturing. And this study is about Austria, and it's about the extent to which adoption of digital technologies and services innovation go hand in hand. And what he finds is that impact on turnover is not visible. We had this said at the very beginning of this conference, that still, the fact of all the digital transformation doesn't seem to be easy to capture as such. And what he also sees is that higher services utilization tend to support new product development. But this is an example, and it would be interesting to see whether in other countries we observe the same stylized dynamics. Then again, Raquel Ortega Argiles synthesized the discussion had in a session that was focusing on global and local innovations. And actually, this session ultimately was about global value chains. And basically, the different studies were analyzing GVC patterns in specific sectors. So by the time the studies were looking at urban innovation system, the main findings is that place-based innovation systems are indeed shaped by global value chains participation, and also openness, accumulation of academic knowledge, joint innovation activities, market-driven commercialization process, all seem to have a very important role to play by the time we talk about good place-based innovation systems. By the time instead the focus is tilted towards looking at developed countries, we see that GVC and the participation reorganization of industries that goes with it affects local productivity growth. And what these studies find is that it depends. I mean, we are economists. We are the masters of the universe saying it depends, but it depends on the type of GVC to see what is the effect on local productivity. And accounting for the extent of digitalization reveals a stronger effect of productivity growth from forward linkages rather than from backward linkages. And this, of course, is important for policy because it depends where countries are. It will depend which kind of productivity we could observe. Then there was another study that was looking at the sample of top world R&D performers, which are very dear to my heart. And especially what they were looking at was the different types of global innovation networks. So, of course, there is some types that are more geographically concentrated, where we observe the importance of universities for the development of this GIN type of institution. And then there are more geographically dispersed structures that actually seemingly don't emerge very well in the indicators we use. So another policy relevant message that is, think of different indicators for different purposes. Another evidence that emerged during this session is the vertical disaggregation of production that leads to increasing importance of supplier and components, and the role the multinational companies play in this, and that the networks now include top-tier suppliers. Apparently, this process, actually, as could be expected, is more important in modular products, such as electronics and automotive, than in industries such as pharmaceuticals. And again, as we said, M&Es are extremely important in driving the shapes and the dynamics of global innovation networks. Then there was especially a study on German and Brazilian machinery industries, and what they basically find is that innovating and upgrading in machinery GVCs increases both the size and the complexity of a country productive structure. Now, here we have to be careful about the direction of causality, but that's the correlation that emerges. And that the upgrading of innovation initiatives seemingly are dominated by powerful transnational corporations. So competition here is something we might want to think of. And last but not least, mapping value chains is important to understand the structure of innovation activities in firms, industries, and places, and this is not something that is very often done, and perhaps we will need to learn more. George Crisolo Ruiz, sorry again for misspelling your name, was chairing the advanced manufacturing local and global aspects, and had a paper by Holman which was focusing on additive manufacturing, and they clustered the categories on a position map, but basically what they show is that changes are taking place within all types, but we cannot really identify radical changes by the time we talk about industrial transformation and additive manufacturing. Antonietta and Montresor conversely look at regional diversification partners and key enabling technologies in Italian regions. And they see that they play a very important role in regional diversification of economic activities. However, they also add that these key enabling technologies, I mean, I have a hard time calling cat, because it's like I'm talking about cats and dogs. And they drive the different trajectories the region could follow to move from what is like a duplicative type of place, a path-dependent diversification, to a diversification that is marked by catching up or jumps, if we want to call it, that are both at spatial and technological level. And then, of course, there seemed to be a correlation between larger number of KET and higher capacity to move to more unrelated patterns. But some colleagues instead looked at something that is very peculiar, that is military innovation, with the idea of trying to see dual-use intervention. Why they bother about this? Because they want to understand the relationship with whether these dual-use inventions that are triggered by military would help determine the optimal level of financing of these type of expenses, and the capacity of firms to capture this military-oriented innovation that then are exploited for civil application. Now, evidence suggests that dual-use innovations need a longer time to be developed, and that the US similarly has a better ground for this kind of spillovers, and this is more the case in US than in Europe and Japan, and dual-use inventions seemingly more likely to occur from cross-border development. Of course, this has important implication on which kind of limits one might want to put on disclosure. Then Maria, and I really thank her because she just was sharing this morning and then she was talking and still she sent me notes. So thanks a lot, Maria. The session was about the effect of barriers on investment in intangibles and whether and to what extent we can devise new methodology to assess the impact of the crisis on firms' failures and exit. Now, the policy implication of these sessions, in a nutshell, are that financial barriers do affect, importantly, investment in R&D, and this is very much in line with existing literature. And investment in R&D are very much anti-cyclical ones, and this is even more important to support them during crisis period. The theory behind, well, by the time we look at that, we realize there is a lot to be done to anchor work on intangibles and work on innovation investments. The boundaries at present are somewhat blurred, both conceptually and methodologically, they argue, and this is all the more important given what are the kind of ongoing changes also in measurement endeavors of national accounts. And here I dare to add something that is a work that my colleague Chiara Criscuolo, so difficult questions to her, not to me about this graph, but the productivity is slowed down. So when we talk about firm dynamics, I think we have to be really, we should try and understand better, because we have some stylized facts that emerge very strongly. And one is, as I said, the work of Chiara that is about the productivity slowdown. But you know, the worrying news is that the productivity slowdown has been accompanied by an increased dispersion in productivity. So you see in this graph, the green line, how high the bottom half of the distribution goes in terms of productivity dispersion as compared to the top half, so the best performers. And we need to understand why and how to address these issues. The very last session I'm going to report about is Industry 4.0, and thanks to Kai Ingo Voigt. The first paper was about artificial intelligence, the second paper about robots or labor productivity, and the third paper about competencies for in-house development of digital innovations. Now, as you see, there are very valuable practical implications in all three papers, and I would invite you to read them because I didn't have the time, I'm sorry. And, but still, I think both the three of them, with some concentrated in some industry, others on a broader discussion, actually point to one thing. The digital transformation and Industry 4.0 is a tale of many tales. We're talking here about hardware, intermediate ICT services, platforms, which we don't know very much about, also how to measure them, software, robots, ICT specialists. We have to look also at the human capital that goes with it, the issue of big data, another big question mark by the time we try to measure them. And e-sales, for instance, so what is the market that corresponds to the digital transformation? So we need to understand more in all this direction. And actually the OECD, and of course, last but not least, artificial intelligence. And at the OECD, what we did actually was to try and give some numbers and try to capture the extent to which different industries have gone digital by looking at the intensity of the digital transformation by taking into account a number of indicators that we can measure for several countries and over time. And these are software investment, ICT tangible investment, intermediate ICT goods, services, robot use, online sales, and ICT specialists. The bottom line is what you will think about, services and computer being much more penetrated by the digital transformation goes against the evidence. So the question is how to better measure and how to better capture the dynamics of the digital transformation. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Maria Grazia. I think you set the bar very high for your colleagues.
I don't know how Maria Grazia read this, but... Sorry. Did you read off the F, or did you read the...
Yes, yeah.
Okay. It's just right there. Okay, cool. Okay, so first of all... Okay, cool. Okay, thank you. So, okay, you don't see me, by the way. So, can I tell a little story, so just to have fun? So I was in Sweden, and I think Eva Hagsten was there, and they invited me to talk after this super tall, handsome, super cool Danish guy. Like, okay, fine. And, everyone was laughing, listening and everything. And then I had to discuss his paper, and I just stand like this. Okay, I was standing like this, and as usual, you move your hand and explain, and everyone was just laughing. So, and they said that he was like looking at a computer with hands. So, let's try not to replicate the experiment. I think I've done once, So let's start and stand here, and you will see me reading, because, I prepared this very quickly. So, okay, I don't know how you do this now. Cool. So let me thank the organizing committee, and I want to thank a special person, because I've organized a few of these very big conferences, and it's a lot of work, and you need an organizing committee, but you need some sort of core energy, and I think, Pietro, you have been great in that, so thank you so much for this. Pietro also has a name that I don't know how foreigners pronounce, so Moncada, Paterno, Castello, so thank you so much. But, Pietro was also very good, because he invites you, makes you feel great, yes, Chiara is so great, you have it. But then you need to be in the scientific committee, which I didn't thank, because otherwise I would thank myself as well. So thank to the other members of the scientific committee. And then he says, oh, yeah, you have accepted paper, so you present your accepted paper. And by the way, Chiara, you have forgotten, but I did ask you to do the closing. I'm like, oh, okay, fine then. So nothing such a free lunch with Pietro, so you know that much. So... he asked, okay, do this summary. So here it is. I have to say that, we have lots of winners here, because all the chairs have been wonderful, and, they have been really great in sending things just on time. Toyota should learn from them. So here they are. Okay, I don't know how you do this thing. Technology is not working. Where do you push it, Maria Grazia?
Just the flag underneath, yeah.
No, okay, we do it like this. Yeah, okay. So thank you. But then I decided we had the award to Bronwyn, extremely well deserved. The award to Martin, again, very well deserved. And I thought, let's have a chair award, So a bit of excitement. The winner is chair of 5B Sustainability, Claudia Ghisetti, who was also, by the way, presenting. I don't know where she is. Where is Claudia? Well done, Claudia. She sent a great summary, and again, I was at the session, she did a great job. Now, I'm not going to go and I will not follow Maria Grazia's step. I will be a bit more humble than this, because this is another thing. I did it a bit differently. So I try to think, okay, what is the common thread that I can find amongst all these different sessions? And to me, there were two big themes that everyone can go home and talk to your children and say, we learned two things that are important for your future. And as my job is to advise policymakers, even though my daughter thinks this is not a real job because I don't cut anyone's hair, I can go and say, look, we need to think about the future of employment, what skills we need, how is wage inequality going to increase, and how can innovation, on one hand, help with the transition to a green economy, but on the other hand, what are going to be the implications in terms of structural change, in terms of employment gains and losses in the future economy. Now, one common thread amongst all these is really the need of good data. So we can have the best, new machine learning, AI and everything, but if we don't have good data, we are not going to go very far in our job, which is to give evidence-based policy advice to government. So this is really my three main takeaways from today, the main common thread. Okay, I have to stop. I don't want this. Because I'm left-handed, I stand here. Can I? Yeah, it works. Because then I can do this. So let me start with employment skills and as I said, sorry, it's a bit busy, but I think some main messages and some key things. I think when we think about innovation, digitalization, and green transformation, I think we need to think. My take from this paper is that there were all the time winners and losers, okay? And this is something that is a big message for policymakers. These things will affect actors in the economy, sectors in the economy, and occupation in the economy in a different ways. And so you really have on the one side the winners, so there will be employment growth, there will be wage increases, but then there will be downsides, there will be tasks that are going to be replaced by industrial robots. There is going to be potential job losses due to changes, for example, in the demand. And I mean, there was a paper that discussed this looking at the automotive sector in Germany, which is, quite high on the political agenda of the country. And so, we need to understand better how who is going to be the winner, who is going to be the loser, and in particular, what are the implications, for example, in terms of training needs and training costs, and I think Maria Grazia has some very nice work on this at the OECD. But also, how is innovation and, the digital transformation more broadly connected to inequality? And this is particularly important because we know, especially from a political point of view, that some of the results of election lately are also connected to the big resentment that there is, with globalization and the digital transformation. So I think there is much more that can be done to understand this. And there was a paper that looked at manufacturing in the UK that sort of looked at how, even though rents are generated, they're shared unequally with the workers, and then this creates inequality both within and across firms. And this is something that we are looking also at the OECD. We have ongoing work where we try to sort of, as I will explain, exploit new data, this linked employer-employee, to really try to understand how much of the increase in inequality that we have seen in many countries comes from increase within the firms across occupation, how much it comes actually in differential pace across firms because differences in productivity, but also difference in market power. So these are very important issue for policy because, it really kind of helps, for example, motivate productivity enhancing policies, which might ultimately have the goal to reduce inequality, especially if we lift the bottom of the productivity distribution up. So this link between firm productivity inequality and between firm wage inequality. Now, there is a lot of evidence on employment impact, and these are some papers where they look at the link between both digitalization and R&D and employment creation, employment destruction. Now, I also try to summarize the different results in three main messages that I think are important when we want to think about policy implications, at least, of the work. One is we need to sort of go beyond direct effect and really look at spillovers or indirect effects of innovation and digital transformation. For example, there might be a negative impact, which might be the direct one, but then there might be indirect creation jobs. And today's keynote by Professor Vivarelli, I think, was very much also in this line. And I think, this is his keynote would have been probably another summary of the papers in this topic in the conference. The second thing is, for example, diffusion. We think of creation of knowledge creates rents, which is absolutely true, and as I said, these rents are shared unequally with the workers, but then this knowledge will diffuse to the rest of the population, and then this inequality and the skill premium, that, for example, this was a paper that was presented, will then diffuse over time. The second big main message, which I'm a big believer, probably I would create a sect if I could, heterogeneity. Heterogeneity is very important. Not everyone will be affected in the same way, and as I said, there will be winners and losers. And when you think of digitalization effect, for example, there are very different effects according to the sector you look at. This was an example coming from India, but we could look at other countries. Final point is the role of complementarities, and here I'm focusing on complementarities of skill, and this was a paper by Andrea De Panizza, where he looks at the role of education of owners and what impact, and if you want, is also a spillover with the education of the people that are hired by the educated SME owner, and so then this will also have an impact on productivity. Now, let me also give me some broader conclusion, which is the fact that this evidence is still scarce, the evidence of the different links between inclusion, innovation, structural change, and inclusion, and this is even more true, for developing countries. Now, some policy conclusions that were given by the paper, and this is not, it's not my own views. This is just reflecting, the views from the session. Targeted intervention on the demand side could contribute to mitigating the job losses. Fiscal measures to compensate losers could be another way to go about it. But in general, all policy measures require better analysis, better evaluation, especially when we look at the downsides of innovation and the digital transformation. Second main point is, as I said before, this understanding of the linkages and of the spillover. So, for example, one way of doing it is to look at input-output linkages. Now, one final point in terms of complementarities, I already mentioned looking at complementarities, on the real economy side, but let's also try to understand much better the complementarities in terms of policies. So sometimes you can get really value for money if you implement two policies at the same time, and this is something that there is a lot more work that needs to be done to understand how this works, and similarly, we need more work in understanding the role of specific design features of policy. Finally, and this was a very nice paper this morning, I felt, we need to understand better the effectiveness of policy, so policy evaluation is key, and we need to go beyond the publication bias that we only publish what works. Sometimes for policy is actually much better to understand what does not work and why. So this again was a message that I drew from this today. One point, data needs. I think, as I said, this was my common thread. Data collection needs to be extended. Services sector is still an area where we don't understand anything, but when you think of jobs, this is really where most of the jobs are located. Intangible investment, human capital, but also, even basic stuff, hours worked. We don't have a lot of information when we look across country. Data access, because it's not just about better data, but also about data access. Again, extremely important, and I think Eva Arxen today had an example. I mentioned few cases where we are trying to overcome some of these problems, and together with this comes combining data. So we are all looking for the bang for the buck, value for money, and we want really to answer new questions, but we all have the same resources, if not shrinking resources. So we really need to find a way of combining different data, which sometimes mean overcoming legal obstacles because we cannot match administrative data with big data, with survey data. Now, that said, I think it's very important to keep in mind the statistical properties of this data, because sometimes if we don't take this into account, we cannot give reliable and credible policy advice. So yes, it's fine perhaps sometimes for an academic paper, but I think when you need to give policy advice, it's important to understand what part of the distribution you're looking at, which sector you're talking about, if you're talking about sector, if you're talking about occupations, etc. Okay, I'm afraid I'm not in San Francisco. I would love to, but I'm here. Although Seville is wonderful, so let's not say anything politically not correct. I don't know about timing, so whatever. This is going to be one of my, probably this is my last slide, so then stop. There was this very interesting sustainability session and green technology session as well. This is not my area of focus, although after having read a couple of things, I think this is really super interesting. And one thing I think is key, and this was very much stressed also by the chairs, you need to have heterogeneous approaches and focuses, and this was kind of part of the nature of the session itself, because of the complexity of the topic and the scrutiny, and as Claudia suggested, I mean, really need to adopt multidisciplinary lenses here. So to me, the conclusion also, not only for research, but also for policies, you need to go beyond silos. And this is easily said and hardly done, I would say, even within organization. I don't know about the JRC, but I know about the OECD. It's always hard, and you need to design proper incentives also to be able to go beyond silos and collaborate more. But if we want to deal with these difficult issues of the green transformation and sustainability, you need to go beyond silos. Now, one important issue when you think about sustainability, and we can see it also very much, for example, in France, and it goes back to the issue of winners and losers, there will need some adjustments. And policy needs to take account that these adjustments have some costs. So this, I think, it's very important, and they need to think on how to solve for that. Sorry, I'm reading a bit because I did it very last minute, this one. Yeah, one important, let us talk directly about point 3, which is a policy intervention. One of the papers was looking at industrial symbiosis, to sort of allow agents to cooperate to achieve a zero waste society. This is really this transition to the circular economy. And there were some suggestions on potential policy intervention that could favor this industrial symbiosis. So this could require public investment, for example, stimulating demand by procurement, but also, so it's a carrot and stick kind of issue, setting standards or taxes, for example, landfill tax. And I think this is an issue that is very topical in many countries. One point that will come again in the next slide, and then I really close, is the larger the network, the larger the effect. So I think scale is key, and this is something that from a European point of view, I think there is much more that can be done to make scale achievable at lower cost. There are lots of coordination costs, and I think this was also the topic of one of the keynote. The entrepreneurs was saying, it's very hard for me when I need to hire people across the border. I need to know their different labor laws and so on. So I think this is something that is very important. Again, when you think about green technologies, it's not just about a support for a given technology, but looking at the whole ecosystem. So again, it has to be a systemic thing. Now, policy mix is important. This I raised already at the beginning. And there is an important point here again, which I mentioned at the very beginning, which is spillovers. So green innovation seems to be to have larger spillovers than non-environmental ones. And this is actually very related to a work that has done also by a co-author of mine, Ralph Martin, who has really looked at this in detail. So I think this is something that one sees in several papers now, so it's quite important. Finally, minimum R&D threshold expenditure seem to be key. So again, scale matters. So again, let's go back to thinking on how the EU policy can facilitate achieving that scale. So let me stop here. I hope I didn't overrun. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chiara. Really great overview, great synthesis. Now, Hilde, it's up to you.
Okay. So I'm going to start with a sentence that you've heard already several times. I'm standing here between you and No? Standing. I'm
Should be
standing.
Yeah.
I'm standing here between between you and lunch. But certainly at this time, and for those that are not from Spain, lunch is really overdue. I'm also very hungry, so I have all the incentives to try to be short on this here. So the topic that I was assigned to is the fusion of technology. I really am very happy with this, having been assigned this topic here. Because I think it's really a very important topic. We've already long recognized this. We know all the studies showing the high social rates of return relative to private rates of return. So there's lots of power in this diffusion here. Yes, yet it's a relatively less studied part in innovation. We focus a lot on creation, on R&D, less on the adoption side here. And these two things are also linked because during the adoption process, a lot of initial ideas really get improved on here. So I think this diffusion part is really a very important complementary aspect of innovation that we should really take seriously here. On top of that, I think it has become also much more important recently, and we've seen witness of that in the plenary sessions here. So it was already discussed also by the other angels, Charlie angels here. So the digital technological revolution, we talk a lot about it, but we don't see it in the productivity growth. So that paradox could be reflecting a problem of a diffusion of this technology here. Also the concentration in a few big players here, big tech, with then a growing divergence between the leaders and the laggards. Work by Kier has really made that very clear. Could also again suggest this problem of diffusion of technologies from these leading companies to the lagging companies here. On top of that, we have a concern in Europe that since we don't have the big tech and we don't have, we also had in the past problems with digital technology adoption. Maybe we might be missing again a fast diffusion process here. But it's not just only digital technologies, also in order to deal with the climate change, also green technology and the diffusion of green technology and the speed of diffusion of green technology is really very important. So this diffusion aspect, I think, is really very high on the policy agenda, particularly in the EU. So I think in terms of relevance of the topic and the push from the policy community for knowing more about the fusion of technology to the academics is clearly made in this conference here. But I think it also makes clear that there are many different areas in the academic literature that address this diffusion agenda here. You can look at it at the country level, at the region level, also at the firm level, for general technologies, but also for very specific robotics, AI. So that's why also it was really hard to deal with this topic here because it runs through almost all sessions we've seen here in the conference. So I should have gone to all the sessions, which of course I could not do, and got a summary of all the papers, but I only got a selection of this here. So my comments are likely to be not covering all the CONCORD papers, or actually more than the ones that I was supposed to comment on here. So I will keep my comments relatively general here and not go into individuals here, because I think almost every paper actually contributes to this issue here. So one important issue, first issue on when we're looking at the fusion here is measurement. So how can we identify who are the relevant actors in the fusion and in adopting? So we've seen in the past that's on the one hand, certainly more in the macro approach at the country and regional level, that we do this very indirectly, that we look at productivity, TFP performance, and then identify those which are lagging here as those that still need to improve, and those countries that are catching up as evidence, catching up in terms of their TFP performance as evidence of diffusion here. But of course that makes the link between diffusion and performance already very intrinsically connected here, and I'll come back to that later, how important it is to also disentangle these here. We've seen also much more direct measures at the country level, which try to measure the spillovers directly here, embodied in trade. That's where it all started with, because the idea was that the knowledge would be embodied in traded products here, also in FDI. But we see even increasingly, and also we've seen a lot of papers at the conference here, using citation information and patterns in order to trace the spillovers more directly. The idea is that these citations trace inventions that build on prior art, either other patents or scientific literature. It has the big advantage using those patent information to trace spillovers that you can really zoom in at the micro level. Not only in terms of actors, but also in terms of technology. So we can really identify spillovers at very detailed levels of technology, digital as well as green here. For instance, Chiara mentioned the work to show that green technologies have higher citations here. So that's what you can really do with these patent information. But it also illustrates how important it is, also something that Chiara already mentioned, that researchers really have access to large data sets that are accessible and open to use here. And thanks also to, we've seen a lot of applications of that and papers in the conference here too, is that with these access open data sets and the use of big data algorithms used for cleaning, matching and screening, we can really make much more use out of patent data for also for the diffusion here. So it's definitely a good illustration of how good data help good research here. Yet I would like to still also warn for not overdoing the patents because they simply are so easily available here, because the citation link is not necessarily a technological diffusion link here. So we still need to assess how good it is as a proxy here. There is the issue of coverage. There are non-patenting firms, sectors, countries, technologies here. And also particularly for the adoption, it requires, because we need to trace it through patents, that there is sufficient novelty and further innovation in the adoption for it to be covered in patents here. And there is a lot of adoption that might be going on that's not sufficiently novel, but adopting existing technologies here that you don't pick up in the patents here. So a good data set, we can do a lot of that, but we also always need to, certainly for the diffusion, take into account the measurement errors that we have here. So that's why also more direct measures of adoption are also very important. And at the firm level, that brings the case of surveys, where we can really directly get evidence on who is adopting or not. So the Community Innovation Survey has spurred a lot of research and innovation. In principle, also can capture this adoption here, but it's not technology specific here. So it has really a lot of disadvantages in that respect. And to my surprise, I didn't see so many CIS papers in this conference here. On the contrary, there was this ABIS survey by the European Investment Bank, several papers on this, and actually they focus particularly also on adoption of digital technologies, not clean here. But again, it shows that complementary with patent data, these surveys on adoption actually are also very valuable for researchers to work with here. So if we have solved this measurement problem, hopefully in future better in trying to really get better measures of who's adopting here, then the next question is, what do we want to know if we have that data here? So we want to know what are the incentives, the drivers for firms to adopt technologies, digital or clean. Also, what are the competences, the complementary assets that are needed for adopting here? And what are the barriers for adopting technologies here? So is this access to technology? And here the patents might also play a negative role in the sense that if they restrict too much the IP rights of the owners, might actually also make diffusion more difficult process here, and we need to look at this too. But access to skills, definitely, and we know that from surveys too, access to skills is a very important barrier identified in these surveys here. Not just only access to digital skills and digital IT people, but also digitally sufficiently agile management too is also a very important complementary factor here. Access to finance, what we typically are looking at, how important is that for adoption relative to creation, I think is important to look at. Access to markets here. And we need to know also for which kind of firms, which kind of regions, countries and technologies, some of these barriers and incentives play out differently here. And here I like to come back to this notion of the importance of identifying what are the incentives for adopting technologies here that relates to the private incentives for firms to adopt. Productivity, increased competitiveness, markups here. And this relationship between adoption and performance is a very tricky one here in the methodologies to be used here. You have to be able to know the exact relationship ex ante and ex post between adoption and performance to identify these incentives here. So that's still, I think, a persistent challenge in this literature here, is how to deal with that endogeneity here, sort out by structurally modeling explicitly the link between adoption and performance, both ex ante and ex post here. But that also requires really appropriate panel data that we would actually need here, or using exogenous shocks for setting up proper counterfactuals, but then we really need also good exogenous shocks to look at here. So in general, still a bit of a challenge beyond data access, also in terms of methodologies, particularly to sort out these incentives to digital technology, technology adoption in general here. But then, of course, also for the policy agenda, what's important is what kind of policy instruments can we deploy, and how effective are they here? And of course, that depends a lot on understanding better what the major levers are in terms of incentives and barriers here, because that will also help to identify what policy instruments have the biggest potential for affecting the adoption productivity link here. So it's which instruments, and particularly also which policy mix instruments. Chiara also mentioned this here. One important area that research can actually help for policy discussion, first of all, is which areas to select here, because we have increasingly this mission-orientedness here, and I think academic research can help a lot, because which areas to pick really depend on where are the highest social value from these technologies here relative to the private values. Can we know that? Ex ante, ideally here, but at least we can try to get closer to that. And again, the example that you raised here with the work on green technologies having way more spillovers is a good help to identify which areas for mission-oriented policies. But then which instruments and which ones relate to more information on incentives and barriers. And I think what we've seen here in the papers presented here is that we really need to go beyond pure funding. Access to finance, it is a barrier here, but it's not one of not the only barrier here. It's definitely a complex system of barriers here, which also definitely requires a policy mix here. We've seen quite a lot of emphasis on the regulatory agenda here, on the competitiveness of markets as an incentive here, and also the access to skills, again, like to point that out. And that also, again, relates to the interaction with labor markets and labor market regulation here. So, and also an important result that came out from several of the papers here is this importance of organizational, managerial capacity within companies. Here, visionary, technological savvy entrepreneurs. We had a very nice example with Anita here. That is a very important complementary asset for adoption and to turn adoption into success here. Of course, we can try to pick that up with firm fixed effects, but that's not enough. I think we really need to know what is in the firm fixed effect here, need to know more about these complementary assets, how they actually work and how policy could actually improve them, if that's a very important constraint here. And it also makes the case that for the policy analysis, we really need various levels of analysis working together. As labor markets, we need to understand better, product markets, but also we need to work closer with macro regional modeling here next to micro firm level here. So that's in terms of what we can suggest in terms of which policy instruments would have the most potential. But then also there are several studies here and also in the literature out there and evaluating which ones eventually are effective here, even if they have the potential. If once you start implementing, how effective are they? And that's the whole area of policy evaluation. I think what we've learned from the conference here and from other research in general is the importance of looking at the innovation policy mix and analysis, not just only at individual instruments, but really the interaction. We have some nice examples here in papers here at the conference. Also, in terms of really addressing this adoption, I think it's also important not to just, we have a lot of evaluation of general tax grants and taxes. tax credits which really look at R&D in general, but do not really sort out the specifics of adoption here. So to which extent are our major instruments also good enough for incentivizing adoption is, I think, still an important issue to look at here. And then what we definitely also miss is exogenous variation in policy here. So perhaps we could use a bit more cross-country variation, but also randomized control trials is also definitely something that would give much more heterogeneity and more effectiveness in this agenda too here. And then finally, my last slide is actually looking more to the future. And I think what this conference and as past conferences has really made the case for is that we need a continuous set of CONCORDi conferences here. Because what's really unique for this type of conference compared to other conferences is that it brings together policymakers and academics in interaction. And it's that two-sidedness of the network or two-sided network that is really very important here, because both of these sets are co-creators of a better evidence-based innovation policy here. So policymakers can learn from academic research on how they can improve their policy instruments deployment, and we've given several examples of that, of how this happened here in the 2 days. But also academics can learn from from interactions with policymakers to make their research much more addressing policy relevant questions too. And on the other hand, I also hope that the interaction actually makes policymakers to also learn more and trust more the bottom-up work of academics to avoid getting stuck in policy fashions too here. So sometimes it's also good to learn to those that are not only addressing already identified policy missions here, but also to look in a more bottom-up fashion here too. But another way in which I would like to push the policymakers too is they can also help the science of innovation policy analysis, not just by suggesting topics, but also how to improve the data infrastructure here as well. So we've seen a lot of illustrations of how access to data really helps and is essential for good research here. The potential of patent data and the fact that they were open access versus publications, except for like PubMed, but as soon as they are more constrained, will not be used as effectively here. We've also seen a nice example of the scoreboard data. Many Concord papers here, and they really show that open access to data is really important and will be used here. And that's again, I think, something that policymakers or public policy agencies also need to realize how important their role there is. In terms of another example that makes that is the Community Innovation Survey. There the problem is really to link this with other data sets because of anonymity here, and you see how much that actually closes a lot of use of that here. So also again, trying to address that by being able to match these data before you send them out so that you avoid anonymity. Think about these data access issues, I think is very important, and the incentive for policymakers really is to see how, if you solve this problem, how it will be used in academic research here. But it's not just only making publicly available existing data, but also data collection on their own policy instruments. Here I definitely also would like to call for more openness for that. And in general also the whole regulation around open access to data and data sharing with the GDPR, how that affects the science of of innovation policy definitely is also an issue to take home for the policymakers to really consider their contribution to this agenda as well. And then finally, I would also like to emphasize the importance of the Concord conference to bring together not just academics and policymakers, but also academics from various different strands here, microeconomics, management, technology, regional, empirics, theory here. There are not so many places where we actually have us meeting all together in a format that allows for a lot of interaction here. But also on the policymaker side, I think also there the interactions among the policymakers, because we have from various different areas here, science policy, but also innovation policy, microfinance, regional, digital, environmental, labor, finance, competition policy. So this whole network effect and ecosystem that Concord is creating here I think is very important, and it's very important to keep that also in the future here, because the returns will only come from a persistent networking that this conference realizes here. So thanks for all of you in contributing to these interactions and for the ones who are making this ecosystem a reality here. So looking forward to seeing you next time.
Thank you very much, Reinhilde. I'm really amazed at the way you have managed, the three of you, to synthesize in such a comprehensive, detailed, and quick way at the same time the works of two very intense days. Really, I would ask you for another round of applause too. We are getting a bit late, so I will not let much more time to pass between Reinhilde and her lunch. But I think at this moment we are supposed to host the host. Is it right? Or I would go first, maybe take my 5 minutes of glory first. Okay, so 5 minutes, I promise, and then I think the amphitryon would take the final word. So the president of Fundación Cajasol, which hosted us in this great venue. So now my task is very easy, because I should synthesize the synthesis. And therefore, there's nothing else to synthesize. So I will try to go to the, I would say, asymptotic, probably, synthesis, and give you just a flavor of 5+1 keywords. Just let me do this. I'll try to do it in the way I manage. So the first keyword is digitalization. And impact of digitalization, impact on economy, impact on innovation, impact on productivity, employment, inequality, society, impact on who are the winners, who are the losers. So the whole set of impacts, which are very, I would say, intricate and intertwined with each other. Second keyword is skills. We have heard about them a lot. So skills for innovation, gap, access to skills. What about education? How to manage the skill gap and the catching up, and I would say adaptability of skills to the new challenges. Third one, it's a buzzword, but it's still very valid. It's intangibles. And it's about, well, all that you know about intangibles. So I think it is also linked, of course, to IPR and regulation also, competition, business environment, institutions, and so on. Number 4, diffusion. We have just heard about it. Absolutely. I mean, knowledge diffusion, innovation diffusion, what to do about territories, territorial heterogeneity, local global connections, who are, again, the places that win and the places that lose in this game. Number 5, networks, global value chains, but also global innovation networks, networked firms, multinationals, but not only multinationals, networks of clusters. So networks that make places disappear to some extent. Finally, that's number 5+1. It's something that it's quite close to my heart, and it is, I tell you, very, very high on our agenda, I would say, in the Commission right now, which is the link, the triangular link between innovation, sustainability, and inclusiveness. How to, I would not say disentangle, because it's not about disentangling, but it's about actually putting really these things together in a novel way, in a novel approach. So the intimate link of, and trade-offs, as we've heard, but again, how to really put this forward, how to make things go on with regard to, again, the triangle between innovation, sustainability, and inclusiveness. This, I think, is something where both the research community and the policy community have a lot of work ahead of them. So, I think I've taken 4 out of my 5 minutes, and then my 5th minute is just a big thank. So a series of thank you. I would say, normally you start with individuals and you finish with all, so I do the other way around. I would like to thank you all first. Thank you all for presenting, for discussing, for challenging, for exchanging. I mean, this is the livelihood of the community, and we, as a JRC, we commit to keep it rolling. So yes, we commit there will be another CONCORDi in a couple of years. Thanks to the OECD, thanks to the colleagues of the OECD for such great collaboration, for the report we have written together. Thanks to Maria Grazia, Chiara, thanks to Alessandra Collecchia, who's part of the organizing committee. I think it's a great collaboration, and we are very pleased about it. Thanks to all the scientific committee, thanks to all the organizing committee, and I would just, I mean, I'm 20 seconds more. Please let me thank my colleagues. I would like to thank Marta Dominguez. I would like to thank Nicola Grassano. Sara Moroso, all the colleagues that have put a lot of energy, commitment, time. They have really, they have done their best in order to make these things going. I said it, didn't I? Nicola Grassano, yes. And then final thank, all in one breath, Pietro Moncada Paterno Castello, thanks. So, my last word is just to give the word to the host. If he's coming. Oh my God. So.
Wait, 5 minutes for him, please.
5 minutes. The host is not there. So now, just to keep the momentum, I can tell you some jokes, or maybe does anyone not at all agree with the keywords that I have just put forward? So some disagreements. Pietro.
Pietro disagrees. Oh God.
Disagrees.
Just I take well note of your 5 more 1 point, but I think there is one topic that we should mention. Maybe it's the 6th one, which is data, access to data. Otherwise, we cannot make a good support to policy making, because it's science-based policy making. Science without data is another science, I should say. So that's my point.
Pietro, I think you are perfectly right. Actually, I put data here at the very end of my sheet. But indeed, yes. So I think that everything is ready to give the last word of this conference to Mr. Antonio Pulido. He's president of Fundación Cajasol, and I would invite him to come on stage and to deliver his final speech. Por favor.
aquí o desde ahí? ¿Cómo quieras? Yo lo hago en español. Bueno, buenos días, o buenas tardes ya. Perdonadme que lo haga en español, aunque me han dicho que ha sido la conferencia todas en inglés.
Yes, but they all understand Spanish.
¿Sí?
Todo el mundo entiende español. Después de 2 días en Sevilla, todos.
Bueno, pues entonces encantado. Pues decía que buenas tardes, conferenciantes, amigos y amigas. Permítanme unas brevísimas palabras, pues aunque ya sea tarde y sea al final, de bienvenida aquí a la Fundación Cajasol en esta última jornada. Estamos muy orgullosos de haber acogido a este nuevo encuentro bienal de CONCORDi 2019, que representa un foro centrado en uno de los retos fundamentales a los que se enfrentan las sociedades y las economías de nuestro tiempo. Adaptarse a la vertiginosa transformación de los entornos e instrumentos de producción e intercambio de bienes y servicios. Manejando diferentes tipos de informes, sí hay algo que ponen de manifiesto de una manera pues casi unánime, y es que nos alertan ya de que existe una altísima posibilidad, un porcentaje elevadísimo, algunos lo sitúan en el 85%, de que los puestos de trabajo que serán necesarios en apenas una década, pues todavía no tenemos el diseño de qué tipología van a ser. Pues bien, estas previsiones, decía, cumplen, y son diversos también los estudios e informes que apuntan en dicho sentido, y que no cabe duda de que la expresión vertiginosa, aplicando a las innovaciones, muchos casos disruptivos que estamos afrontando prácticamente en el día a día, no resulta en absoluto exagerada. Yo creo que cuando hacemos previsiones de este tipo, y hablamos ya, y ya lo habéis estado hablando en estos días, de que las previsiones de trabajo, de empleo, de tipología de empleo, pues no son los que hoy tenemos, y que un porcentaje elevadísimo será de otro tipo como consecuencia de las nuevas tecnologías, del comercio internacional, etcétera, etcétera, pues yo creo que es una realidad. Hacer previsiones o prever qué va a ser, lo único que nos tiene que aseverar de alguna forma, de tener una mente pues lo suficientemente abierta para ir construyendo ese tipo de futuro. Y a mí, que lo que me preocupa mucho son los más jóvenes, es que sean capaces de tener claro cuál es el futuro que tienen por delante, y sobre todo quitarle cualquier tipo de miedo. Yo creo que en este tipo de encuentros, aparte de pensar qué podemos tener o cuáles son los escenarios más razonables o más probables que se pueden tener, es importante que sirvan de alguna forma también para hacerle llegar a los más jóvenes que pueden existir, que yo creo que todavía, yo soy muchos años profesor de universidad, no le transmitimos ese tipo de escenario. Por eso creo también que encuentros como este, que reúnen a responsables políticos, investigadores, gestores, resultan sin duda de capital importancia. Desde luego, si queremos que la Unión Europea continúe siendo un polo de innovación, de avance y de mejoras en la economía mundial, que se encuentran amenazadas, y huelga decirlo, pues por numerosos factores que tenemos hoy de inestabilidad, como las tensiones comerciales de China y Estados Unidos que todos tenemos, por limitarnos también de alguna forma al entorno europeo, pues por los efectos aún sin determinar que podría generar el desdichado Brexit, y hacer que este tipo de jornadas se centren en la industria es sin duda también, de alguna forma, una necesidad. Hoy mismo se manifiestan pues, en todo el mundo muchas personas, especialmente jóvenes, preocupados, lo decía antes, por el futuro también de nuestro planeta, por la sostenibilidad de nuestros modelos productivos y por la consideración del cambio climático como un nuevo reto planetario. También la Unión Europea debe sin duda, liderar esta reflexión y tomar iniciativas para lograr que la competitividad, imprescindible por otra parte, si no tenemos esa competitividad no podremos hacer otro tipo de actividades, pero mucho más tienen que ser compatibles, como decía, mucho más en este mundo globalizado como el nuestro y que resulte también acorde con estas nuevas exigencias que exigen una mayor capacidad de transformación y de adaptación permanente, no solo desde el punto de vista tecnológico, sino también en la formación, en las actitudes y en la educación de los trabajadores. Miren, nosotros, nuestro breve, poco o mucho granito de arena, sí estamos comprometidos. Las líneas de actuación de la Fundación Cajasol son básicamente 4. Acabamos de inaugurar, que de ahí vengo, una exposición de arte contemporáneo que les invito a que la vean, justo aquí en la sala de al lado, de Saura de Chillida, de Barceló, de Gordillo, muchos artistas españoles muy buenas aquí al lado, por la acción cultural, por la acción social, pero sí estamos tremendamente preocupados e implicados por la formación y por el emprendimiento. Esas son dos líneas que desde nuestra actividad estamos cada día impulsando más y que nos preocupan más. Tenemos diferentes instrumentos para hacerlo. Tenemos una escuela de negocios que este año precisamente cumple 30 años y una serie de programas de microcréditos para los más jóvenes. También damos algunas ayudas sin ningún tipo de garantía, simplemente porque creemos en el proyecto, a algunos empresarios e innovadores que nos traen algunos productos tecnológicos nuevos. Por tanto, decía que es muy importante la formación, la actitud y la educación también, no solo entre los más jóvenes, sino también a veces pues, en el tejido empresarial, donde también tenemos muchas relaciones y hacemos muchas cosas juntos. Como muy bien también se ha señalado en este foro, más que nunca la creatividad y las habilidades humanas son fundamentales para el avance de la sociedad. Os decía que desde aquí de la Fundación Cajasol trabajamos intensamente, en la medida de nuestras posibilidades, a contribuir precisamente que esos avances impregnen todos los procesos de innovación y de emprendimiento, inevitablemente también asociados a un mayor esfuerzo en I+D, I+I. Pues eso, como les decía al principio, para nosotros es un orgullo, y eso sí quiero manifestarlo, tenerles aquí, y quiero que sepan que siempre encontrarán en nosotros un granito de arena en ayudarles, apoyarles, impulsarles, felicitarles, porque creo, y lo digo honestamente, y os conozco, que el proceso y el esfuerzo que estáis haciendo para favorecer todos estos procesos de innovación en nuestra economía y en nuestra sociedad en general merecen el aplauso de toda la sociedad. Nosotros nos brindamos humildemente a dos cosas: a facilitaros en la medida de nuestras posibilidades vuestro trabajo, el poder colaborar en lo que hagáis, y en algo que, como he dicho anteriormente, creo que es importante: ayudaros también a la divulgación del trabajo que hacéis, porque es muy importante que toda la sociedad tenga la referencia de estos trabajos tan importantes y tan interesantes que hacéis. Por mi parte, nada más. Muchísimas gracias a todos por su presencia aquí en la Fundación Cajasol, y espero también que vuestra estancia aquí en Sevilla haya sido del agrado de todos. Muchas gracias.
Muchísimas gracias por sus palabras, palabras importantes del papel de la Fundación y también para apoyarnos a ese trabajo que tenemos como organizaciones internacionales que intentan hacer algo para los países y los ciudadanos que le pertenecen. I would now have the final say in closing this conference. I think everything has been said. Just to thank you again, thank you all. Wish you a very nice weekend, either flying or staying in Seville. But anyway, if you fly, have a safe trip back home, and don't forget the keywords. We'll be there again. Bye. Have a nice time. Thank you.
Alessandro, un placer. Aquí tienes tu casa en Sevilla. ¿Vale?
Y muchas gracias por darnos la posibilidad de estar aquí en este edificio muy llamativo.
Quiero dentro de 2 años otra vez aquí.
Vale, bueno.
Como